Greg Koukl back at you here. Actually, first segment of our final hour. But I am back because we've had 2 hours already. Hey, thanks for joining me. I don't know if this is your first hour or not, but I'm glad you're on board. Stand to Reason is the show. And it's the place to get a well-furnished mind. I have something I want to read to you as I launch the show here. Now, this is something I've had for a long time. And it is not written by a Christian. But it is a topic that I have not only talked about, but written about. And it's something that plagues Christians because they get hit with this kind of nonsense. And it has to do with the question of whether, or I should say the assertion that the whole account of Jesus of Nazareth is a refabrication of ancient mythology of dying and rising gods. This is an old charge, by the way. It's gotten some boost in recently. But this goes back to the late 19th century, The Golden Bough, a novel written by a guy who basically made the same claim that let's see, James Fraser, 1890. The copycat theory, basically, and it's taken many forms. Some of you might have seen the Zeitgeist movie or know of it, a kind of quasi-documentary that is meant to explain how the myth of Jesus came to be, as these ancient myths of Osiris and Mithras and Horus are kind of cobbled together to form the story of Jesus of Nazareth, which account has all these particular details in it. Born of a virgin, 12 disciples, 3 wise men, December 25th, resurrected, and on and on and on, that really are all parts of ancient myths. There's nothing new in the gospel accounts, in the story or the myth of Jesus. This was a main piece of the argument that Dan Brown advanced in the Da Vinci Code. So I have actually written a piece on this called The Recycled Redeemer, and I give a number of reasons why this is nonsense. It's just complete nonsense. Some of you might have the book Come Let Us Reason, New Essays in Christian Apologetics, Paul Copan and William Lane Craig, editors. And there are 2 articles there dealing with this, or 2 chapters. One of them by Mary Jo Sharp does the story of Jesus mimic pagan mystery stories. Another by Mark Foreman challenging the Zeitgeist movie, Parallelomania on steroids. Both of these addressing the same question. What's fun about this piece that I want to read to you is that this isn't a piece of Christian apologetics. This is an article that I found last year, and it's called 6 Famous Documentaries That Were Shockingly Full of, and CRAP, so I won't say the word just to be genial here and polite. It's a bunch of garbage, all right? And this is from cracked.com. And I just had so much fun with it. It's not very long. I'll just read it to you. And one of the documentaries was Religulous by Bill Maher, a famous atheist who has taken every opportunity he can to try to make fun of Christians. A comedian, so that he's often funny when he does it, but funny and sound are 2 different things. And so here, this person looks at this documentary. This person, you'll see at the end, not a particular friend of Christianity, has this to say. In Religulous, Bill Maher sets out to make you question what you think you know about God, telling you everything church leaders don't want you to know. He interrogates everyone from truck stop parishioners to pious scientists to visitors of a holy amusement park, poking holes in their beliefs by pointing out things like how the original sin isn't mentioned in the Bible, or how the Christ mythology is eerily similar to other ancient religions. At one point, a Tumblr-ready slideshow view informs us of the many similarities between Jesus and the Egyptian god Horus. Now, they don't go into the details here. There's a show that you can watch, an animation thing here, so you can see it. But anyway, he continues, man, that's some incriminating evidence there. How come the entire Catholic Church hasn't collapsed under the weight of this one documentary? And then he tells why. And the way this article is structured, it looks at these 6 documentaries that are full of garbage and gives a summary of the film and then offers the fallacy that drives it. So there was the summary, and here's the fallacy. All this Jesus was copied from earlier religion stuff has been going around the internet for a while, and it will make you look awesome if you post it on a Halo message board, but none of it's true. The Egyptian links have been debunked by actual Egyptologists. Let's start with the virgin birth part. You got to make some pretty big logical jumps to the claim that any of those earlier gods were born from virgins, having come from a mother 7 times over, Krishna, or some freaky necrophilia, Horus, and come from under a rock, Mithras. These are all ones that were alleged to have been virgin births, not a chance. That is, the stories themselves don't say this when you go back to the primary source documentation. He continues, then there's a resurrection thing. Contrary to Marr's claims, Mithras was never resurrected, and the older versions of the guy's story don't have any of the Jesus similarities. Those similarities, let's see, come about in the 1st or 2nd century AD, that is, after Jesus was born. Horus, like Mithras, was also never resurrected, didn't have 12 apostles, and didn't raise Asar from the dead, which doesn't translate to Lazarus even a little bit. There isn't even any record of a figure called Anup, the baptizer. The closest we come is Anubis, the god of embalming, which astute readers will note is a little different from baptism. That's the way he spells little. Good point. Oh, by the way, original sin is totally in the Bible, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a scholar who disagrees with the overwhelming evidence that a person, not necessarily a divine being, matching Jesus' description existed during his purported lifetime, which is true. So where did Marr get all of his garbage? Probably from the viral documentary, in quotes, Zeitgeist, which doesn't cite any sources, or, and this is a serious possibility, the Da Vinci Code, which the writer says is about as historically accurate as the movie Splash, which is about a mermaid. None of this matters, and he concludes, and this shows his colors. He's not a Christian, but he recognizes garbage when he sees it. None of this means the Christian Bible is right or that it represents the one true religion, but if you think something's baloney, that's a synonym for what he actually wrote. If you think something is baloney, the answer is not more baloney, which is exactly what Bill Maher gives in Religulous and exactly what you find in the documentary Zeitgeist. Now, I'm not putting Bill Maher down because he's an atheist or Zeitgeist down because it doesn't agree with me. Both make factual claims about history, and both are false in their claims. It's amazing how many Christians have been upended by these kinds of claims, these assertions that they have all this historical evidence that the story of Jesus, the myth of Jesus, is just a fictional character. Jesus is just a fictional character, and he was created from other myths. Of course, the question that I have, and that I essentially ask in the piece that I wrote on the issue, titled Recycled Redeemer, which you can find at str.org, is how do they know it's a myth to begin with? Jesus, that is. I hope you realize that you cannot declare any particular alleged historical account mythological simply because you are able to identify other accounts that predate it that are similar in a significant way. even if they were similar in a significant way, just because they predate this later account does not mean the later account came from them. That is a logical fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc. Just because one thing comes before the other doesn't mean the first thing caused the second. It's very straightforward. And C.S. Lewis identifies the problem here too, putting it in a little different way in his article Bulverism, which you can find in his book God in the Dock, a book of essays. And here's the way he puts it. First, you have to show that a person is mistaken before you can, it's meaningful to ask why he's mistaken. So let me say that again because it's really important. First, you have to show that a person is mistaken before it's meaningful to ask why he's mistaken. These people who advanced this idea have already assumed there was no Jesus, that Jesus is a fictional character, that Jesus of Nazareth never existed. And so now they're scratching about trying to figure out, well, where did such a story come from? And they imagine they found parallels in the ancient myths of Egypt and Rome. But first point, the point of this particular author here, is the similarities don't exist. All those claims that are made of similarities just simply are false claims. You look at the primary source documentation, which this Zeitgeist so-called documentary does not do. It never cites an original source. It cites other people who cite other people who cite the first people. It's a big circle, but none of them go back to the original sources. For those people who go back to the original sources, these parallels simply do not exist, but that doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because just because there is a parallel that came first doesn't mean that the second thing copied from the first. Now, the first time that I heard this claim was from American atheist Michael Shermer. I heard him make it in a debate with Doug Geivett, and I've heard him make this claim since then. And it immediately occurred to me, though I've never done this, I did debate Michael about 4 years ago, actually next Sunday. Oh, wait a minute, is that right? No, 4 years ago, December 30th. So a couple months up. Anyway, I debated Michael, but this issue didn't come up. I did think of this, though. When I heard him, it was immediately apparent to me what the flaw was in the reasoning. And it's best illustrated this way. I could have gone up to Michael Shermer that night when I first heard him make this claim and said, Michael Shermer. Yes, that's me. No, you couldn't be Michael Shermer. Well, yes, I am. No, you couldn't be. Why do you say I couldn't be Michael Shermer? Because I have met 4 people in the last month that claim to be Michael Shermer, and they weren't. Therefore, you can't be. Now, obviously, that's a mistake, right? Just because there were imposters or interlopers or whatever before doesn't mean the real McCoy can't show up. Now, how would Michael Shermer be able to demonstrate to me that he was the real deal and not an imposter? Well, it's actually quite simple. All he had to do was show me his bona fides, pull out his driver's license or his passport or something like that. Once he showed me his bona fides, then I'd know he's the guy. Well, the same thing can be done here. What are Jesus' bona fides? I'll tell you what the bona fides are. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These documents can be tested to see if they're historically reliable. If it turns out that certified historians on the main, and in fact it's hard to find an exception, believe that these accounts give accurate depictions of the life of Jesus of Nazareth, even though they may not agree with every particular detail in the account, for example, the religious. If these people do this based on the canons of historical analysis, well then, we have every reason to believe that Jesus of Nazareth lived and did the kinds of things, by and large, that are recorded there in those primary source historical documents. And if it turns out that there are documents more ancient that seem parallel, so be it. That doesn't change the bona fides. And, in fact, just as a curiosity, get on your internet connection and Google up futility. Now, all by itself, you're going to get a lot of nonsense, but this is the title of a book that was written in 1898, I believe, and it was a book about a transatlantic voyage of an indestructible ocean liner named Titan, believe it or not, which on its maiden voyage between New York and London, traveling at 14 knots in the middle of a March or April night, struck an iceberg and sunk. And since the lifeboats available for the people was one half of the 3,000 population on the ship, like one third of the people on that ship perished, or maybe more. Now, that was a fiction. It's called futility. And 14 years later, it happened. The Titanic struck the iceberg. And there are probably 15 specific particular details that are exactly the same as the fiction written. Now, is this extraordinary? Of course it is. It's an extraordinary coincidence, but the point I'm making is, even if there were all of these parallels in the life of Jesus that we found in ancient documents and in ancient myths, that itself would not be enough to demonstrate that the life of Jesus found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was itself a fiction. You'd have to look at the primary source historical documents themselves and determine if they are sound or not. Because first you have to show that a person is mistaken before it is meaningful to ask why he's mistaken. If you want to check out my article, go to str.org. All the details are in there, including the details about futility. The article is called Recycled Redeemer, and just before the show, I jumped on our website myself and typed the title into the search bar and found the article, so you're welcome to it. And the whole case is clear there. You might also check out Come Let Us Reason, New Essays in Christian Apologetics by Koukl and Craig, editors, and check out the two articles there that go in a lot more detail than I was able to. All right, let's take a break and then take your calls on Stand to Reason.
Each of us as Christian ambassadors faces two daunting challenges when trying to make a difference for Christ. First, how do we initiate conversations about spiritual things in a way that doesn't seem awkward? Second, how do we keep ourselves from getting trapped or overwhelmed by others more aggressive than we are? Well, that's what Greg Koukl can teach you in his book and DVD curriculum on tactics. Greg will teach you how to maneuver in conversations so you can create more productive dialogue with skeptics and challengers. Tactics are practical skills that Greg gives names like Columbo, Suicide, Steamroller, Rhodes Scholar, and more. Tactics are a way of engaging others effectively and winsomely, no matter what the subject. If you're tired of finding yourself flat-footed and intimidated in conversations about what you believe, if you want to increase your confidence and your skill in discussions, no matter who you're talking to, then Tactics is for you. Order Tactics in book, DVD, CD, or MP3 format at STR's online store at str.org, or simply give us a call at 800-2-REASON. That's Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions.
All right, let's take some calls here at Stand to Reason. Let's talk with Jamie in Pasadena, California. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Greg. Can you hear me?
Oh, man, you are busting up really weirdly. Do you have another connection that you can make, like a landline, or I guess you don't?
Yeah, I do. Is it getting any better?
Okay, it's almost impossible. It sounds like you're underwater, and your
Okay.
words are bubbling out.
Uh-oh, that's
It's
no good.
one of those kind of things. But I know what your question is. And
Okay.
so what I'll do, because it has to do with the Apostles' Creed about Jesus descending into hell, and your question is this heresy or is this heterodox? That would be false but not heretical. It's like a misdemeanor. It's not a, capital crime kind of thing theologically. So can
And
I?
why is it? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, the connection seems to have cleared up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So the Apostles' Creed says that Jesus was died and was buried and descended into hell, and then on the third day he rose again from the dead. Now, let me recommend a source for you, and I'm pausing because I always forget the Reformed theology guy who did Wayne Grudem. Thank you, Melinda. Wayne Grudem, Grudem, in his systematic theology, the larger one. There's kind of a popular version that's a smaller one. In his systematic
I
theology,
have it.
well, he goes into a lot of detail. This is the thing that I enjoy. I think it's a good systematic, but I enjoyed this particular part more than anything else that I saw there. I had so much fun because he really does a good job doing an assessment of the Apostles' Creed, particularly this aspect of it. And I'll give you the kind of the short course here. This phrase, descended into hell, does not show up in the earliest versions of the Apostles' Creed. It shows up later. Now, keep in mind, a creed is a creed. It's a man-made document expressing what a group confesses to or believes. So the fact that it wasn't in the original doesn't mean it can't be added later. It isn't like, well, that's not in the original biblical text and some scribe added it later, so that's not really the Word of God. That would be a problem in biblical text, but it doesn't apply quite the same way here. But I think the significance here, as I recall Grudem's analysis, and he actually has a chart in there that by which you can track the textual history of this phrase. I'll remember how it shows up. It says, he was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell, and the third day he arose again from the dead.
Mhm.
Now, the word hell is also a word that's often is an English word that is translated often from the I think the Latin word Hades, and Hades is Sheol, is a synonym for Sheol, which is the nether world, that is the place of the dead. We think of the word hell now in a very specific way. We think you're down in the flames, and this is the place of torment for unbelievers, made for Satan and his angels, and eventually will be the abode of all who, in one way or another, have followed him. That's the place of final judgment. So when we say hell, we think of that place. But in the earlier use of the language, it wasn't so much that place as it was the netherworld, the place of the dead. And this appears to be the way the phrase was intended, even when it showed up initially in later documents. So the earliest form of the creed doesn't have it. Then it shows up, and it looks like it is simply a restatement of the line before it. So that is, he died and was buried. That is, he went to the nether world. Okay? It isn't saying he's died and buried, and then Jesus went to the hell place and suffered and was in torment for 3 days, and then he escaped, or something like that. It was meant to just to restate the reality of his death. It was to underscore that he was a dead man, and then he was a live man. Crucified, died, buried in the netherworld, boom, and now he's resurrected from the dead. That was the point. Nothing more theological was intended by the addition of that phrase, okay? And then more was made of it as time went on. So my takeaway from this is that the phrase descended into hell should probably be struck because it does not reflect any biblical teaching, and he goes into Grudem goes into depth on that, and it is not a core to any theological notion. It just crept in to mean one thing, and it came to mean another thing, and it just creates confusion, so there's no reason not to strike it. Anyway, the Apostles' Creed isn't our ultimate creedal confession because, as many noted there in the first few centuries, even heretics of a different sort could affirm the Apostles' Creed, so it wasn't adequate to separate the faithful from the heretical. Not completely, more needed to be said, and this is why you had additional councils and the Nicene Creed. We've got, is that us or is that coming from him? Oh, that's our, I mean, I can hear a lot of crackling in the background here, so okay, go ahead. I think I lost you again.
Yeah, I'm here. You hear me?
Yeah, you're back to bubbles again, so
I'm sorry.
it's not your fault. It's just electronic stuff here. I don't know. We're just experiencing a little trouble on our end. Let me just, Jamie, let me just leave it at that for now. Since you've got Wayne Grudem's book, you can take a look at that. All I've done is restate what he does in a much more thoroughgoing fashion. So I'd like to direct you back there. The summary is good for the rest of the listeners, though. Strike that phrase. It just creates confusion. If you want to recite it, fine. Just keep in mind that what that phrase means is Jesus was dead, buried, and then he rose again from the dead. Thanks for the call, Jamie. Let's see. Let's try. Shall I deal? Let me deal with Nancy. Okay, we had I got a Norman coming up here in a few minutes in Manitoba, but Nancy was on board. She couldn't stay, but she left her question behind, and I want to address it. Apparently, she was of necessity, as you'll see. She had to be vague anyway. So, apparently, in her church, there is an ethical issue. There is an ethical breach of one of the members of the leadership. Is that right, Melinda? Okay, so there is a member of the leadership that is involved in some kind of moral problem. Now, I'm taking it to be a substantive moral problem, or else she wouldn't be calling in about somebody who's just crabby or annoying or something like that. And the question is, and she knows about it, but others do not. So she has some inside information. And her question is, what should she do? Well, this is a hard issue in the sense of being burdensome. I mean, it's unfortunate that one has to face this, but I don't think the correct action is difficult to figure out, presuming, again, that this is a weighty moral concern. If she knows about it but others don't, it does raise a question to me. Is this something that is a result of her discovery? That is, she discovered something on her own that revealed this problem to her, but other people don't know about it. Let's just take it like that, because that seems to be the way it came down. If she knows about it, but nobody else knows about it but this man, and it's a weighty moral concern, I think she ought to talk to the man. This is somewhat of a Matthew 18 circumstance. And the Matthew 18 circumstance says that if there's a brother that is caught sinning, then first go to that brother or sister, of course, individually, and try to reason with them, talk with them. And if that Christian responds, repents, turns, you've won your brother, Jesus says. Okay. Now, if not, if he does not listen, and here I'm reading Jesus, if he does not listen, take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every fact may be confirmed. Now, the fact that's going to be confirmed in this regard, it seems to me, is the resistance that this person um, is giving to being corrected morally here. Now, once the witnesses are in play and the person still does not respond, Jesus says if he refuses to listen to them, then tell it to the church. That means you expand the circle. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. In other words, you disfellowship that person as an act of discipline. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 5. There is one other guideline that is important, and it's in, I think it's in 1 Timothy. And that is that when it comes to church leadership, you do not entertain an accusation against them except for on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. That is, you don't just follow rumors. And particularly when it comes to leadership, too much is at stake. If there is a leader, there's a charge against, you got to have multiple witnesses. However, if you do have multiple witnesses, then that leader comes under actually a greater sense of discipline. He should be rebuked in the presence of all so that others are fearful of sinning. I don't know why this can't be followed in this particular case. It may be that no one else knows about this sin except for Nancy in North Carolina, but and it may be that that's the way it can stay if she's able to confront the brother and win the brother. And that's the way it should be. You don't spread gossip. And it is no defense for spreading gossip that the gossip is true. Doesn't matter if it's true. That's not the point. This is a need-to-know basis, you know. And there's a proverb that says, the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels and go deep down into the heart of a man. And this is a little bit cryptic, but I think the point is that when you tell somebody a secret about a person, about something bad, it's very difficult for that person who hears it to get that out of their head. And the next time they encounter this person, what do you think they're thinking? They're thinking about that whispered morsel that is down in there. Oh, yeah, I know what you did. And so we're not to do that. We're not to poison other people's thinking or their minds regarding another person in that way. Instead, we have a guideline to follow. We keep our mouths shut and we go to the person or persons that are involved and we deal with that. And if there's not a response, then we bring somebody else, particularly on an egregious issue. One last thing I'll mention, this is from the book of Galatians. And Paul writes there in Galatians 6, if anybody is caught in a stumble, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, looking to yourselves, lest you also be tempted. And so I think this is meant to address an attitude. Yeah, sometimes people are stumbling badly. Brothers, sisters are to go as appropriate and seek to restore that person in a spirit of gentleness, being mindful that we stumble ourselves. And it may be us next time around. But there is to be this kind of healing that takes place in the body of Christ as we work with each other to confront and to bring to repentance. Proverbs has another one, and I'm going to go to break here in just a second, that is helpful here, and that is faithful are the wounds of a friend. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. The kisses of an enemy are deceitful, but the wounds of a friend are faithful. Sometimes we need to tell our friends the hard thing that's really good for them, and it's an act of our love, caring, and friendship to them to do so. All right? Let's run to break, and then we'll get to Norman in Manitoba, Canada after this.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call I Donate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
All right, let's talk with Norman. And Norman, welcome. How are you, Norman?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Glad to have you on board.
Good. Thanks for having me. I just have a question about how we should understand the blessings that Jacob gives the sons of Joseph as well as his own sons at the end of Genesis in chapter 48 and 49.
Let me kind of flip there real quickly. Did you say 48 and 49? Is it, or 38 and 39? What chapters?
48, 49.
Oh, 48, 49. Okay. And direct me now to the specific verses. Genesis 48.
Well, it sort of starts specifically around verse 17 of chapter 48.
Okay.
And my wife was looking online, and she came across a number of commenters who seemed to interpret these blessings of not only Joseph's sons, but the sons of Jacob as being prophecy for sort of today. And they see the sons and grandsons of Joseph as standing in place of modern nations. For instance, they use Genesis 48:19 as a reference to being Great Britain and Ephraim being the United States.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you called on this. Let me just read this so everybody knows where we're at here. Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh's head. So he crossed his hands and he ended up giving the right hand blessing to the younger. And Jacob, this is the grandfather now. So you have Abraham, Isaac, which is Israel, and Jacob. No, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is Israel. Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And Joseph saw that his father got his hands mixed up, and it displeased him, and he tried to change that. But his father said, no, this is the way it's going to be. I know my son, I know, but this is the way my blessing is going to be. And so he gives this blessing, and the blessing, he says, is by you, Israel. He blessed them that day, saying, by you, Israel, will pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, behold, I'm about to die. I'm going to take you back to the father, blah, blah, blah. So there's the blessing. Now, I don't know. I'm pausing here because it's frustrating. There you have, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. He put Ephraim before Manasseh. Now, before it, he says, you will become a people who will also be great. However, the younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Why anybody would feel justified in reading back 3,000 years into this Great Britain in the United States completely escapes me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I had the same reaction, but I contacted my uncle who has a theology degree, and I asked him, how should we be reading it? And he said that it was kind of vague, but said that it is partial blessing, but also partially prophecy, and he didn't really elaborate. So,
well, if you want to say partially, it is a blessing for future prosperity. So you cannot separate the blessing from the prophecy, because the blessing is that you will become a great nation. This is going to happen in the future. So I don't have any qualms with taking this as prophetic given the words of the blessing. They are for a future impact. But that doesn't mean they are prophetic in the sense that they apply 3,000 years later to America and Great Britain. I see absolutely no reason whatsoever to read it that way. And it strikes me as a little bit ethnocentric to do so. Why can't this be Ethiopia? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I had suggested a multitude of nations could have been ancient Rome if you want to read it that way.
If you're going to try to specify which nation is in view here, you got lots and lots of options probably. I think we should just take this at face value. If you look at the promise of God is to prosper Abraham and make a great nation out of him, and that would be Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and out of Jacob, then you have the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 tribes all prospered in some way, and here's a special blessing of prosperity on two of those tribes, the two sons of Joseph. Levi didn't have a portion in the country because that was the priesthood. Joseph's portion was divided between his two sons, Manasseh and Benjamin. I'm sorry, Ephraim and Manasseh here. And so so you have a split there under Joseph. He gets two portions, and this is a blessing. That's all it is. It's a blessing of prosperity. I don't see any reason to make any more of this. And I think sometimes when people take these general statements like this that have value and understanding their general claim and try to then start 3,000 years later start putting national names on them, I think it's silly. I think you're
okay. Well, I agree. That's what I was thinking. But as I said, she's found a number of commentators and stuff, and they all seem to point to this idea that it's the key to understanding sort of end times prophecy and being able to associate these sons and grandsons with modern nations is what helps us to sort of understand what's going to come in the future.
Well, I don't know how it is possible to do that, to make a connection between these two individuals who lived 3,000 years ago and somehow follow their progeny down in an orderly way to find out who the nations are. And there is a tactic from the book Tactics that I'm employing in this particular case, and that is the tactic called Rhodes Scholar. A Rhodes Scholar is a tactic in which you ask of the scholar. You have scholarly pronouncements, just like you've mentioned. Well, there are commentators who say this. Okay, great. Now I know what that scholar believes. What I need to know is why he believes it. I need to know the reasons why the scholar thinks that this verse here somehow portends the rise of the U.S. and Great Britain as nations that come from Abraham's loins. There is a movement called British Israelism that some cultic groups adhere to, but I don't see the biblical justification for that either, and this sounds like it. So just because the commentators say that is not enough for me. I'm going to say, look, I'm reading the same passage you guys are reading. I don't see how you get that. So what is your justification for believing that this is somehow a key to prophecy? I mean, they're not here to answer that question, but unless they give you a really, really good reason, I don't have any reason to take their scholarly assessments seriously. I'm just going to let that one go.
I felt the same way. And when you watch sort of the videos and stuff, they just sort of give it as a blanket statement that this is the way it is, and then they don't explain how they make that conclusion. They just start offering up their books for you to buy. So
well, there you go.
Some more,
There you go. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the issue. All right, Norman?
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I appreciate your call. I got one more thing I want to deal with before we close the hour, and this is an email question that came in, and there's 4 or 5 paragraphs here. I'm just going to read the basic question, and the basic question is: would you allow your child to visit the home of a child being raised by a homosexual couple? would the sex of the couple matter? And this apparently is a question that was put to the person who sent the email. And they write, as it has been put to me, the child is not responsible for their circumstances. Well, this is obviously true. If you have a child being raised by a homosexual couple, who would blame the child for that? Nobody. But it does raise a question that I'm sure that people are facing now, because you have not the proliferation at all, but it is not completely unusual to encounter a same-sex couple who has children. They may be down the street. Those children may play with your children in school, that kind of thing. So this is a challenge that some of you are going to have to face, and you're going to have to answer the question. I guess the way to approach this, the way I would begin to unravel this, is I'd want to ask the question, what exactly would be the problem with having my child, let's just say Eva or Annabeth, 6-year-old, 9-year-old, my girls. What would be the problem of having them visit a child who is a friend of theirs, but who is the child being raised by a homosexual couple? All right. Now, I'm not saying there would be no problem. I am asking what would be the problem, and this is what question, it seems to me, has to be answered before you can know how to proceed here. What would be the problem? I can imagine two immediately that might be enough of a problem that would result in me saying no to my children. No, you can't go and visit or be in that situation. And it has nothing to do with the child. My daughters at this stage are, shall we say, sexually naive. When there was some comment about a guy kissing a guy, my girls looked at me with astonishment and did one of these ew numbers. Like, ew, like, who would do that? Why would they do that? So I'm reasonably confident that they are naive about these things, and I am happy to let my little girls stay little girls as long as they're little girls, all right? I do not want them exposed to the kinds of things that they are not in a position to manage properly. I remember a little detail out of Corrie ten Boom's Hiding Place. She would ride with her father on the train to the big city where he would set his watch to the official clock there and then go back to their little town and set all of his clocks in his clock shop to that official time, and he'd do this on a weekly basis, and she'd travel with him. And she was reading in her own Bible, and she came across a phrase that was called sex sin. And she didn't know what that was. And so she asked her father. She said, "Papa, what is this? What does this mean? What is this sex sin?" And her father thought for a moment, and then he looked up on the rack above where they were sitting at his suitcase. And he said, "Corrie, can you get that suitcase down for me, please?" And Corrie said, "Oh, no, Papa, I can't do that. That's too heavy for me." And her father said, "You're right. That is too heavy for you. And so is this. So your papa is going to carry this until you're ready to carry it for yourself." That is a fabulous little anecdote. And it emboldens me to be strong and keep my children from becoming sexualized before their time. I don't want them thinking about these things. Let them stay children for as long as they are children. There will be a time for them to understand this. Now, with that in mind, with that in place, how does that relate to this question about allowing your child to visit the home of a child being raised by a homosexual couple? What is my daughter going to think when she walks into this home and she sees that it's not a mother and a father that are raising this child, but it's a mother and a mother, or a father and a father? And how are they comporting themselves with each other? What is she going to think? She's going to think that this is odd. And then what is she going to do? Possibly ask me, Papa, what is this? And that's when I'm going to have to say, Papa's going to have to carry this for you until you're ready to carry it. But don't you think it would be much better for me not to even have to address that? Isn't that a way of keeping them from carrying it by not exposing it to them to the kinds of things that they would raise questions regarding? I think so. I don't need that grief. This isn't an act of hostility towards the child being raised by a homosexual couple, but I can see how I might not want to put my own child in a situation where they're wondering what the heck is going on, and therefore be exposed at an inappropriate age before they're ready to something that I'd rather not have them be exposed to. All right, so that's one reason. Now, that may be adequate. And I'm thinking right now, with both of my daughters, that's enough reason for me just to say no to that circumstance. There's another reason, too. And let's just say that this isn't reason number one doesn't apply. The other reason it might be a problem is it's part of the reason that I don't like TV, because what TV does is depicts circumstances that are morally inappropriate as if they're just swell. And this is a whole range of different things, not just sexual things, but of course, sexual things. There are all kinds of shows that you watch which don't just champion homosexuality as beautiful and normal. And in this regard, they lie because they don't tell the story accurately. But also as premarital sex as beautiful and normal. Is there a new TV show on called Marry the Virgin? Did I see a big poster down by LAX about that? Down where you, like, is that, like, this is I don't know. All I know about TV shows is the posters, and it's something like this is the crazy girl who's a virgin. That's what the TV show is about. I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Because virginity is, like, bizarre for TV land. Is that the message I want my girls to get? No. So if they go to this home where the child is a child being raised by a homosexual couple and everything looks normal at first, is this kind of communicating that this is a legitimate option? This is kind of okay. There are variations to this marriage thing, and this is just one of them. Mommy and Papa are male and female, and that's our deal. But here's another mom and dad who aren't. They're, I should say, here are parents that aren't mom and dad. They're dad and dad, or they're mom and mom. And, well, implicitly, is it possible she might get the sense that, I know it's weird to us, but that's okay for them? So we give a relativistic message. Anyway, that's my concern. And what would be the problem? There's two of them. Now, maybe I'm overstating it. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not. But we're going to have to face this before long. And frankly, I would rather err on the side of be careful when it comes to my daughters. And I suspect when it comes to your children, you'd want to do that too. Not that there's animosity in your heart towards a homosexual couple or the child. Not that you're trying to be judgmental, harsh, mean, unloving, intolerant. None of that is even on the table. This is not about that. This is about your children and what they're exposed to and what that ends up meaning to them. And if you are trying to instill a certain view of reality that you are convinced is true, that is the biblical view of reality, then the more help we can get in doing that, the better. And all the ways that our culture works against to tear that down, we should be avoiding. And maybe this is one of them. Anyway, just a thought. Thank you for joining me today. Enjoyed my time with you. I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Give them heaven this week. Okay, friends? Bye-bye.